Hello and thank you for joining me. I am Sam, also known as Pop Sam Cam, and today I am going to take you through my best albums of 2024. It has been such a massive year for pop music. We've seen so many superstars release, but we've also seen the emergence of new artists and also the breakthrough of artists who haven't always operated in the mainstream pop space as well. If you've been watching this channel for a little while, you would have seen me react to some of these albums that are going to make the list, but there's also a few that I've never discussed. So I've got an abridged version of this on my TikTok, but I thought that this was a good opportunity to just take you through the list and chat about it slowly as we go through each of the top 20 albums. If there's an album that you think that deserves to be on the list that isn't in the list, drop it below and we can chat about some of the best music of the year there. If you do resonate with this list, hit subscribe and I will bring you many more reactions in the new year. But for now, let's dive into my top 20 albums, starting with number 20, Glorilla's Glorious. This is her debut album. Glorilla has had a pretty interesting glow up, excuse the pun. She broke through in 2022 and then last year kind of lost her way a little bit, lost her footing, and it looks like she wasn't going to be able to find that kind of popularity to propel her into the kind of realms of people like Megan Thee Stallion, Ice Spice, Sexy Red, but this album absolutely did that. Glorious had the number one best first week, the best first week of any female rapper this year, including Megan Thee Stallion. And I think it's just because this thing is just so personable. She's really improved her skills. Her rapping has really improved night and day from a couple years ago. There's also depth to this album. There's dynamic. There are some slower R&B moments. There are some gospel moments. And then the turn-up moments are just so much fun. And some of the best things that she's ever done, including things like TGIF. And I also really like her Megan Thee Stallion collab from this year. And the moment with Sexy Red on this record is really good as well. I just thought it was really fun. Number 19, Griff's Vertigo. Griff is somebody who I've been following basically since the start. She is supremely talented, but things kind of took off for her this year. She supported Taylor Swift at her Wembley show for the Eras tour and also dropped her debut album, Vertigo. This album just kind of wears its heart on its sleeve. It is so widescreen in the way that it delivers everything. And I just really like hearing that. Obviously, there are elements of Taylor Swift in there. But more than anything, I'm hearing people like Celine Dion and Enya. There's something really dramatic and grandiose about this record that I love. I thought that Miss Me Too was one of the best songs of the year. I just like her ability to take songs bigger and bigger and bigger when you think there's no more that she can do. I thought it was a really, really fun listening experience from this year. I mean, fun is maybe not the right word to describe this album. It goes through a lot of emotional turmoil, but it's done by somebody who's just such an excellent pop writer. You can't help but enjoy it. Let's go on to number 18, which is Empress Of's For Your Consideration. I don't know if you know Empress Of. She's had a couple records now and she's always been kind of operating in the alternative pop space, infusing everything with the electronic elements as well. She's just one of my favorite artists and has been for a couple years, but For Your Consideration felt like it all came together for her. There are Spanish moments on it, there are English moments on it, there's pop leaning moments, and then there's really more experimental stuff as well. And it just worked coming together as an album. There's a Muna collab on here, which is just like a straight down the line, surefire pop hit. And it sits along moments like Lorelei that are a little bit more pointy and jagged. And I just like that she found a way to combine all that. It feels like the most uniquely her record. And I also just really, really love the album cover, to be honest. I think it's really impressive. Number 17, I've got Nilüfer Yunya's My Method Actor. Nilüfer also, like Empress Of, has been operating for a couple years and delivering records that are quite lo-fi, but always cut through with these pop melodies that really get me. And I think that this is her best album. I think that it's her most maybe challenging album in many ways because it is quite grainy in terms of its approach, but there are some moments on this and some melodies that just pierce through. Like Just Like a Western, I think, has one of the most beautiful choruses of the year. And there's always like a calm and a balance to the way that she delivers everything. There's a real penmanship to her as well in terms of how she writes things. Not everything is laid out clearly. There's a lot of use of like metaphor and stuff like that, but you always get such an immediate sense of the feeling that she's trying to give you without even digging deeper into the song. And I think that's kind of her genius, and I loved this record this year. Number 16, Medium Build's Country. Medium Build's an artist who I actually didn't know anything about this year. He's had a couple of records, but this is his major label debut, and it's kind of got, I don't know if it's a major label, it's his label debut. And it very much feels like he is stepping out and kind of embracing his own artistry. I don't know his story or much about him, to be honest, but it feels like there's been quite a seismic shift in his life, and this album is about embracing that within the country genre. There are definitely country elements to it, but I hear also people like Zach Bryan, I know we're not mention that name right now, but also Bruce Springsteen. There's a song called Stick Around on here that closes out the record that I just find to be so liberating and freeing in the tone of it, in the weight of it, in the way that he sings it. He's got this kind of desperation to the way that he sings everything. And I just feel like it was different to many of the country records that we got this year. It didn't feel like it was adopting country because it's popular or because it's the thing. It just felt like it was the most appropriate fashion to address what he was addressing on the album. So I really liked this one. Number 15, Omar Apollo's God Said No. I've been a fan of Omar Apollo for many years now, and I was wondering where he was going to go with this record, because obviously on the last one, Ivory, Evergreen took off and was huge for him. And then I wasn't sure if he was going to just go into record number 2, trying to recreate that moment. And from the moment I heard Spite, it was pretty clear to me that that's not what he was going to do. He's trying something else, and I feel like he's really developed his superstar persona since the first album. There's something really confident about God Said No, both in the more upbeat songs like Spite and Less of You, but also there's something confident in the way he delivers the more downbeat moments like Dispose of Me. There's an honesty, a vulnerability to the way he's delivering things that I really connected with on this album. I think production-wise too, it's really impressive. It's like very uniquely him, and I couldn't really think of many other albums, if any albums this year, that sounded like God Said No. There's some beautiful sampling on songs like Drifting, and I just think he now has a very clear idea of who he is as an artist, and it's on full display on God Said No. Number 14, Doechii, Alligator Bites Never Heal. Doechii has had a massive glow up in the past few months off the back of this mixtape. And what I think is impressive is a couple years ago, she had a massive hit with What It Is. And that seemed to me like it was going to set the path for the kind of music that she was going to make in the future. And it was taking her in more of a pop R&B direction. It's clearly not where Doechii wants to go, and this mixtape is a major course correction for her and kind of goes into very autobiographical rap work, and she just sounds so much more herself here. I mean herself because she's digging through some really tough shit on this album as well. There's songs like Denial is a River where she essentially has a therapy session and does it in the most like clever, engaging way. And engaging is the word for Doechii. She is so charismatic. It comes through from the first track and you find yourself like hanging on the edge of every single word that she says on this mixtape, whether it's something really deep or whether it's just a turn-up anthem like Nissan Altima, which is one of my favorite songs of the year as well. Loved this mixtape. Number 13, Tems with her album Born in the Wild. Tems obviously had a massive moment, basically because she got sampled on the Future and Drake song Wait For You, which gave her a number 1 hit, but she carries that song basically because it's off the back of her brilliant song Higher. On this album, I wasn't sure what to expect, to be honest. It's been a couple years since she blew up with the Drake and Future song. I think it's been a couple years, or it feels like a couple years, certainly. But on this album, she really didn't let any of that bother her. This is not really a strike for the mainstream at all, apart from J. Cole. There's no heavy-hitting features on here, and even the J. Cole one feels more uniquely Thames than it does Cole. This is just like a showcase of her, one, pure emotion, two, her excellent voice, and three, her love for Afrobeat as well. I think Afrobeat is obviously kind of the tone that runs through this entire record. It feels like a celebration of her heritage and where she's come from, but also like her embracing where she is now in this current phase of her stardom. And you get voice notes from people like, I think her mother appears on this, or her father, talking about where she's come from and how this is like her God-given sort of purpose in life to make music like this. And I feel like it felt so purposeful and so fulfilled, this album, and so rich the way that she delivers it, that I just can't help but keep playing this on repeat, because it always gives me something new. It gives me a burst of energy, or it makes you feel like, I don't know, just warm inside. It's a really, really nice record. Number 12, Tyler, the Creator's Chromacopia. If you'd have told me 10 years ago that Tyler would be doing numbers up there with Drake and Kendrick, I would have told you no way. This is somebody who's stuck to his guns in the most admirable way. With every project, he's done exactly what he wants to do. Hasn't really bent to any mainstream rules. Hasn't really even tried to get a hit ever. And by doing so, he's just developed this niche fan base that has now become this absolute army of fans. The first week numbers for Chromacopia were absolutely incredible. They were right up there with Kendrick's GNX. And for an album that is incredibly complicated at points in the story that it's trying to tell, I would say that it's Tyler's most personal album. He delivers some things about his kind of inner tussle about wanting to have kids or not wanting to have kids, about how he's perceived, about relationships with other people, about whether he's capable of kind of maintaining long-term relationships. It's incredibly introspective, but amongst that, it's Tyler. So he's going to give you these cheeky, charismatic moments like Balloon with Doechii, which is one of my favorites, or Sticky with Sexy Red, and Lil Wayne and Glorilla, which is just like kind of a dream lineup. They sound incredible, the four of them all together, over this sort of marching band turn-up anthem that I think is one of the most impressive moments of the year, and looks like it's going to become a hit on its own terms as well. I just think that Tyler's one of the most interesting artists out there doing it. Every time he drops, it's an event. And every time he drops, particularly since, I would say, Flower Boy, it's been excellent. So this was one of my albums of the year for sure. Number 11, Ariana Grande's Eternal Sunshine. This is an album that to me feels kind of slight. And I say that in a good way. She's teamed up with Max Martin again, but previous times she's teamed up with Max Martin, it's kind of been this big splashy pop event. This album dials that back. It's really, really personal. It's really intimate. She addresses some things that she needed to address on it, and gives you some lyrics that are, I mean, since Sweetener, we've become pretty used to hearing some pretty raw stuff from Ariana, but she gets into it on Eternal Sunshine with a level of perspective that's really cool to hear. And with this beautifully crisp and ethereal sound that dabbles in pop on songs like We Can't Be Friends, but then also goes to hip hop and R&B on tracks like Bye and Don't Want to Break Up Again. It's just really nicely wrapped with a bow. And I think that's why sometimes it can feel like almost forgettable, because it is done with such ease. And every time I go back to it and remind myself about this album, I really, really admire what she's done with it. Number 10, Sabrina Carpenter's Short and Sweet. This is obviously one of the blockbuster pop albums from the year. And when she dropped Espresso earlier in the year, I wondered, one, whether that was part of a project or whether it was just a standalone single. And two, whether she could keep this thing going. I've been a fan of Sabrina's work in the past, but Espresso gave me the vibe that it could be a one-hit wonder for her. It was not that at all. She just kept delivering with singles. She's 3 hit singles in. She's probably got a 4th and a 5th on this album. It just keeps delivering, and it feels like it harks back to kind of that Gaga or Katy Perry era where the albums were just full of hits, like wall-to-wall hits. And I love that she's able to do that, but also keep things super uniquely her. There's so many lines that she delivers on this album that only she could deliver. There's an aspect to her performance that makes songs that would otherwise be kind of forgettable really, really unique. And I think that's the greatest strength of Sabrina Carpenter. She is just a really singular talent, and she's able to elevate these pop moments into something really, really special. And she's done it over and over and over again this year. I think Short and Sweet is a really good album. Number 9, Deeper Well, Kacey Musgraves. I'm a big fan of Kacey, but it was clear that on Starcross she was a little bit conflicted in what she should be, whether she should acknowledge the kind of push to go into pop and the mainstream off the back of Golden Hour, which was an album of the year winner at the Grammys, or whether she should stick with country. And I think a moment like Camera Roll on Starcross shows that she really should have sticked with the country thing. Deeper Well feels like a course correction, but not only that, it's delivered in this atmosphere of calm where she's able to find this perspective that is just really mature and really heartwarming at the same time as well. This is her Saturn Return album. It comes after a period of kind of personal turmoil for her, but you get the sense that she has found this sort of peace, and that just runs through the entire thing, from the lyrics to the production. It's one of those albums that just takes you away and surrounds you in this bubble for almost 45 minutes. And that's exactly what I want from a Kacey record. It makes you appreciate the physical things that surround you in terms of environment. And I think that's very rare for an album. That's what I really loved about Deeper Well. An album that does kind of a similar thing for me is Maggie Rogers' Don't Forget Me in number 8. Maggie, I thought her last album was good, but not excellent. I felt like she tried to go big on too many moments. And I think the great thing about Maggie is that she can just be so kind of relatable because her voice has a warmth to it. And the way that she writes things and approaches things also has a real warmth to it and a real nostalgia to it as well. And Don't Forget Me kind of brought me back to that Maggie Rogers in a big way. I actually think this is her best album ever. She said that she wanted it to feel like a Sunday afternoon, and it does. There's something incredibly comforting about this album. But at the same time, she gets into some tough subjects. I think Don't Forget Me will go down as one of the best songs she's ever written. The way that she approaches her friends kind of hitting these milestones like getting married and having babies while she's still trying to figure shit out. She does it in such a... It's not so much mature as it is a thoughtful kind of way. She's very aware of how she feels about this and how steadfast she is in her ways. And I just love that she wraps that up with the idea of what if I don't make a splash big enough for people to really remember me? That was a really heart-rending moment for me this year, and I absolutely love this album, particularly The Kill, which I think is one of the most effortless, brilliant songs of the year. Number 7, I've got Raven Lenae's Bird's Eye. This is actually an album that sort of floated over my head the first time I listened to it. And now looking back on it, it's easy to see why, because there is such a gentle approach to this record. Her last album kind of went more in an electronic direction, and it was a little bit more hard-hitting than this. But there's this honey-soaked feeling about Bird's Eye that runs through every track, and it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't feel rushed. It's almost like she just sits back in the production and takes her time in telling these stories. And I think that's the greatest thing about it, because the melodies in this just really take over you eventually. A song like Days, which did nothing for me immediately, the more I heard it and the more I went back to it, it just started really taking a grip on me. And that's kind of my favorite albums, the ones that don't entirely click at the start, but eventually get there. I love the approach that she took to this album. I think it really highlights just how amazing her voice is. And it was one that I perhaps had on repeat more than any other record, particularly in the past couple months. Number 6, Kali Uchis or Kyrios. I think that this is just such an exciting record. It was one of the first like main pop albums to come out at the top of the year. And I remember hearing it for the first time, and it just like filled me with sort of excitement and hope for the year ahead, because it's got such a beautiful atmosphere to it. I mean, the cover kind of gives it away, and the title as well, but this album feels like it's in bloom. There's like a springtime feeling to it. Some of the beats that are used on it just feel so almost aquatic in a way. They sound so nice to the ears. And we already know her voice is like, as I said about Raven, her voice is honey soaked. It's absolutely incredible. And this production, I think, is the best that she's ever sounded. But I also love how then she brings in all these other Latin influences, the way that she closes the album with this incredible tempo change up and this stunning finale just made it so exciting to me. And I think that Kali Uchis is one of the best doing it out there. And the speed at which she's able to release these brilliant albums, mind-blowing. Number 5, Magdalena Bay, Imaginal Disc. I was a fan of Magdalena Bay before. I really liked their last record, but there's something about this one that's really tapped in to a wider breadth of people. And I think it's because, firstly, it embraces pop music a little bit more. It's a little bit more straightforward than previous records, but it's also there's no kind of end to the influences on this record. At times I'm hearing like Britpop in a song like Death and Romance, and then I'm hearing ABBA on something like Cry For Me. There's just such a wide range of things that they take on, but it's all wrapped up in this Magdalena Bay sound, which is like widescreen electronic music that owes to sort of like Grimes' Oblivion era. And I think that's really, really cool. The cover kind of gives it all away. It feels like you're being taken into another world. And the first time I heard it, it felt like I was somewhere else for an hour. Like it just sucks you in and then just spits you out at the end of it. It takes you on an absolute journey. And in terms of like a narrative driven pop record, there wasn't any better than Magdalena Bay's this year. Number 4, Cowboy Carter, Beyonce. This album's been so widely discussed, it's hard to add anything to it. But here's what I think is really cool about Cowboy Carter. It obviously has something to tell. Beyonce has something to get off her chest. She wants to make this country record because she feels country within her bones, but was rejected by the terrible establishment that is the CMAs when she performed there with the Chicks doing daddy lessons. So this album takes that and it's like, I'm going to take you on a history lesson. I'm going to teach you a little bit about country music. But at the end of the day, I'm going to show you that it's not all tied to genre, that you define the genre in the end. And this album just begins as a country record and it ends as a Beyonce album. She does so many different things within kind of the country sound, the way that she takes on something like Bodyguard, which has a 70s rock and roll feel, and then takes us at the end into more of like a hip hop moment with Tyrant, and then a dance moment with Two Hands to Heaven. And yet it's all feels like tied to Texas in some way. And I thought that was the coolest thing about Cowboy Carter, is that it didn't feel like she was putting on a country outfit for like these songs and then she was going to take it off and just go back to doing her thing. It felt like she had it in her bones. She also had something to prove, and Beyonce was something to prove is the best kind of Beyonce because she really goes for it then. Loved Cowboy Carter. Number 3, McGee, 2-star in the Dream Police. There was a lot of like really in-your-face pop music this year, which I absolutely loved, but there was something about the mixing of this album that really tickled something within me. And I think it's the way that the guitar kind of leads the melody of these songs and his voice takes a back seat. The way that he makes the guitar sound and the way that he makes the guitar the main star of this album, I think is so, so cool and unlike anything that was happening in pop music this year. But then his voice, which is brilliant, by the way, like he's got a real superstar aura about him led by that voice. His voice takes us through these really sweet pop melodies that hook onto your brain immediately. But because of the mixing and because there's so much reverb and echo, it takes a little while for your brain to zero in on that. And that's why the first time I heard this record, I was like, I'm not sure about it. But it's something within it grabbed me every time enough to keep going back to the point where it lands at number 3 on my list. Brilliant album. Number 2, Billie Eilish's Hit Me Hard and Soft. I've not always been the biggest Billie fan, to be honest. I sometimes have found that her albums were trying on a costume almost. There was something really dark about the first album where it felt like she was trying to be provocative, and then on Happier Than Ever, that I like more, there was kind of her doing this like Hollywood glamour thing. Hit Me Hard and Soft is the first album that feels uniquely Billie. She's obviously been liberated. You can hear that in a song like Lunch. But it's not only about the lyrical content. It's about the production and how she kind of feels like she can do anything now. It's why you get a moment like at the end of L'amour de ma vie, where it just explodes into this kind of like anthemic electronic track. It's why you get her just blending so many songs together in Blue at the end. But she can do all this. She can be wildly experimental. And then she can just write a straight down the line pop masterpiece like Birds of a Feather. And to be able to give all that within 10 songs is just hugely impressive. And if she keeps on this track, she is truly going to be one of the game-changing artists of our generation. Not that I'm actually I'm a little older than Billie, but, of this generation. Number 1, Charli XCX's Brat. I felt like I really couldn't give it to anything else. Let's start with the moment, and then let's talk about the album. The Brat moment, for somebody who's been such a fan of Charli XCX for so many years and has seen her like work and devote herself to these really niche fan bases, to see that explode on a mainstream level was just hugely exciting. But even more so, that it happened with an album that wasn't made to do that. If it happened with Crash, I kind of would have understood it, because that album was aimed at the mainstream. It was a big stage pop record. Brat is not that. Brat is like quite jagged. It's quite abrasive at points. It's extremely vulnerable. The rhyming structures, or should I say lack of rhyming structures, are quite jarring to hear at first. And yet, it's been embraced by all these people. And I think this is why it is. It's because it's so authentic in its messiness. There's something about partying that often gets portrayed in pop music as being just totally euphoric and ditching any sort of other thoughts, leaving them at the door. But Brat doesn't do that. Brat acknowledges that partying can sometimes act as an escape for more vulnerable thoughts. And she takes that on in moments like, I think about it all the time when she talks about having children and whether she wants them and whether her career is like important enough to take over like something that feels quite as grand as having kids. And also insecurities about how other people perceive her on songs like Girl So Confusing and Sympathy Is a Knife. But then I think she just has a lot of fun with it as well. Like, Charli is a club kid, and this was her playground, and she explored it with this kind of vigor and excitement that was just impossible not to eat up as a listener. I thought the whole way it was packaged was brilliant. The way it was marketed was like next level, going to be studied kind of shit. And the way that she presented herself was exciting. It was like unruly, and I liked seeing that in a pop star that was getting all this mainstream attention. So that is why Brat is my number 1 album of the year. I would love to hear your number 1 record. Drop it in the comments and we'll talk a little bit more about this. But thank you for joining me for my run through. As always, I'm happy to hear all your thoughts about this ranking. Subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thank you.